"I never thought offering a glass of lemonade would save my farm," Thomas whispered, staring at the check in his trembling hands. 3 months ago, he was weeks away from foreclosure. Now celebrities were paying thousands to sleep in his barn. All because he'd shown kindness to a stranger on the dustiest day of summer. He looked up at Sophia, her face now recognizable to millions, as she clinked her glass against his. "To seeing the extraordinary in ordinary places," she said with a knowing smile. "The reporters would arrive tomorrow morning. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments." Thomas Everett wiped sweat from his brow with a threadbare handkerchief as the midday sun beat down mercilessly on his 40-acre farm. The cornfields that should have been lush and promising by late June were withered and sparse, casualties of the worst drought to hit Millfield County in 30 years. He leaned against the ancient tractor that had broken down for the 3rd time that month. Exhaustion etched into the lines of his weathered face. At 45, Thomas had inherited his family's farm with dreams of prosperity, but 5 consecutive years of struggle had worn him down to a man simply fighting to keep the bank from claiming his legacy. His calloused hands told the story of endless labor that barely kept him afloat. The foreclosure notice that had arrived yesterday was tucked into his back pocket, its deadline of 30 days feeling like a death sentence. From where he stood, he could see the white farmhouse where 3 generations of Everetts had lived before him. The wraparound porch, with its old swing, was the one luxury he still allowed himself a place to sit in the evenings and remember better times. His wife Margaret had loved that swing before cancer took her 2 years ago, leaving him alone with mounting medical bills and a farm that consumed his every waking hour. Thomas squinted against the harsh sunlight at a figure moving slowly along the dirt road that bordered his property. It was unusual to see anyone walking out here, 5 miles from town with nothing but farmland stretching in every direction. As the figure drew closer, he could make out a woman carrying a heavy backpack, her gait suggesting exhaustion. She paused at his fence line, leaning against a post and taking a long drink from her water bottle. Even from a distance, Thomas could see she was in rough shape, her face flushed from the heat, her hiking clothes damp with sweat. City folk, he guessed by her high-quality gear, probably underestimating the brutality of a Midwestern summer. Something about her reminded him of Margaret, perhaps the determined set of her shoulders, even in obvious distress. Before he could think better of it, Thomas raised his hand in greeting and called out. "Mighty hot day for a hike," he said, his voice carrying across the field. The woman looked up, startled, then offered a tired wave. "Road goes on for another 3 miles before you hit town," he added. "Got some cold lemonade on the porch if you need a break." He wasn't sure why he'd offered. Thomas wasn't a sociable man by nature, especially these days. But there was something desperate about the way she stood there, something that spoke to his own exhaustion. After a moment's hesitation, the woman nodded gratefully and made her way toward the gap in the fence where a cattle gate stood open. As she approached, Thomas got a better look at her. She was around 40, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, expensive-looking hiking boots, and clothes that, while sweat-soaked, were clearly designed for serious outdoor activity. Not your average day hiker. Her face was striking high cheekbones and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. "Thank you," she said when she reached him, her voice pleasantly husky. "I may have underestimated this route." She extended her hand. "I'm Sophia Chen, Thomas Everett," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm despite her exhausted state. "Farm's been in my family for generations, though it's seen better days." He gestured toward the house, suddenly self-conscious about the peeling paint and sagging porch steps. "Lemonade's this way, homemade." "Sounds like heaven," Sophia said, falling into step beside him. "I've been on the trail for 3 days. Thought I'd try a shortcut back to where my car is parked, but your country miles are different from city miles." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "That they are. Where are you from?" "Los Angeles," she replied. "Though I haven't spent much time there lately. Been on the road for almost a year." That explained the quality gear and the slight accent he couldn't place. California people were different. He'd met a few at the agricultural conferences he used to attend when the farm was doing better. As they reached the porch, Thomas motioned to the swing. "Have a seat. I'll get that lemonade." He disappeared into the house, grateful that he'd made fresh lemonade that morning, one of the few luxuries he still allowed himself. When he returned with 2 tall glasses filled with ice, Sophia had removed her backpack and was sitting on the swing, her eyes closed as she enjoyed the shade. "Here you go," he said, handing her a glass. "Thank you." She took a long drink and closed her eyes again, this time in appreciation. "This is incredible. Real lemons?" Thomas nodded. "And honey. From my neighbor's bees. Sugar's too expensive these days." Sophia took another drink, looking out at the expansive property. "Your land is beautiful. So peaceful." Thomas followed her gaze. He'd been so consumed with the farm's failures that he'd stopped seeing its beauty. The golden light streaming through the oak trees that lined the driveway, the distant hills blue in the haze, the rustic charm of the old red barn that needed a fresh coat of paint but still stood proud against the skyline. "Been in the family for over 100 years, he said. "My great-grandfather built this house with his own hands." "You can feel the history," Sophia remarked, her eyes scanning the property with unusual intensity. "Places like this have a soul. There's something special here." Thomas wasn't sure how to respond to that. He wasn't used to thinking about his struggling farm as special. To fill the silence, he asked, "What brings you out hiking in the middle of nowhere during the hottest part of summer?" Sophia's expression shifted slightly, a hint of guardedness crossing her features. "Needed to disconnect. Think through some things." She gestured to the vast emptiness around them. "No cell service, no internet, no people constantly demanding pieces of you." "Know all about that first part," Thomas said with a dry laugh. "Haven't had internet here in months. Can't afford it." He hadn't meant to reveal that, but something about this stranger made it easy to be honest. Perhaps because he'd never see her again after today. "Sorry to hear that," Sophia said, her expression genuinely sympathetic. "Farming's a tough business these days." "That it is." Thomas sipped his lemonade, not wanting to elaborate on just how tough it had become. The foreclosure notice seemed to burn in his pocket. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the creak of the porch swing and the distant call of birds. It was peaceful in a way Thomas rarely noticed anymore. "I grow vegetables," he said eventually, not sure why he was continuing the conversation. "Or try to. Corn, mostly, but also tomatoes, peppers, squash. Used to sell at the farmer's market in town, but gas costs more than I make these days." Sophia nodded. "Do you use chemical fertilizers?" An odd question from a hiker, but Thomas answered anyway. "Can't afford them anymore. Then trying to make do with composting and crop rotation. My grandfather taught me the old ways before all the chemicals took over." "Organic then," Sophia said with unexpected enthusiasm. "That's wonderful." Thomas shrugged. "Necessity more than choice. Would be nice if it meant I could charge more, but folks around here can barely afford groceries as it is." "Have you considered selling to restaurants in the city?" Sophia asked. "Farm totable is huge right now. Chefs pay premium prices for truly organic produce with a story behind it." Thomas had thought about it, but the logistics seemed overwhelming. "City's 3 hours away. Don't have the connections, and my truck barely makes it into town these days." "What about a CSA model? Community-supported agriculture," Sophia explained. "People pay at the beginning of the season for weekly boxes of whatever you're harvesting. Gives you capital when you need it most." Thomas eyed her, curiously. "You know a lot about farming for a hiker from Los Angeles." A smile played at the corners of Sophia's mouth. "I know a bit about food systems. It's part of what I do." Before Thomas could inquire further, she changed the subject. "This swing is perfect. The whole porch is like something from another time." "My wife Margaret loved this swing," Thomas said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Used to sit out here every evening." "Used to?" Sophia asked gently. "Cancer took her 2 years ago," Thomas said, looking away. "Pancreatic. Fast and cruel." "I'm so sorry," Sophia said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. That's impossibly hard. Thomas nodded, not trusting himself to speak more on the subject. They lapsed into silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The porch swing creaked rhythmically, a sound that had always soothed him. "Do you ever rent out rooms?" Sophia asked suddenly. This place would make an amazing retreat. People would pay good money to stay somewhere this authentic, this peaceful. Thomas nearly choked on his lemonade. "This old place? Nobody'd pay to stay here." "You'd be surprised," Sophia said, her eyes twinkling. "There's a growing movement of people desperate to escape their hectic lives, to reconnect with something real. Your farm has that in spades." Thomas looked around at his shabby porch, the fields that were producing at maybe half capacity, the outbuildings that needed repair. He couldn't imagine anyone paying to vacation here. "Just a thought," Sophia said, apparently sensing his disbelief. "Sometimes we don't see the value in what's right in front of us because we're too close to it." They talked a while longer as the afternoon stretched on. Thomas found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years about the drought, the rising costs, the bank breathing down his neck. Sophia listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking insightful questions that suggested she understood more about his situation than most would. In turn, she shared vague details about her life in California, a demanding job she'd recently stepped back from, a book she was writing, a growing disillusionment with the pace of modern life. She was clearly educated and successful, but there was something almost fragile beneath her confident exterior. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the fields, Sophia glanced at her watch. "I should get going if I want to reach my car before dark. Thank you for the lemonade and conversation, Thomas. It's been more restorative than you know." "Least I could do," Thomas replied, standing when she did. "Town's straight down that road. Can't miss it." "Got it," Sophia said, hoisting her backpack with practiced ease. "And Thomas, don't give up on this place. It's special, truly." With that, she headed down the porch steps and back toward the road, turning once to wave before continuing on her journey. Thomas watched her go, this strange city woman who had appeared from nowhere and seemed to see value in his failing farm. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like if she were right, if people would actually pay to experience this place he took for granted. Then reality crashed back in as he pulled the foreclosure notice from his pocket. 30 days. He had 30 days to come up with more money than he'd seen in years, or it all ended here. With a heavy sigh, Thomas returned to his broken-down tractor. There was work to be done, regardless of whether it would ultimately matter. 3 weeks passed, and Thomas had all but forgotten about the hiker from California. He'd been too busy scrambling to find a solution to his impending foreclosure. He'd approached the bank about an extension, called every distant relative who might be able to loan him money, even looked into selling some of the antique farm equipment his grandfather had collected. Nothing had yielded enough to make a difference. With just 9 days left, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with bills spread before him, a calculator showing impossible numbers. The farm had been profitable once, but a combination of changing weather patterns, rising costs, and his own refusal to modernize had brought him to this precipice. Even if he sold everything he owned, he wouldn't clear enough to satisfy the bank. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his grim calculations. Visitors were rare out here, especially on a Tuesday morning, probably someone who'd taken a wrong turn looking for the Johnson place down the road. Thomas went to the door and squinted at the unfamiliar vehicle coming up his driveway, a sleek black SUV that screamed city money. His first thought was that the bank had sent someone early to assess the property, and anger flared in his chest. But as the vehicle came to a stop, the driver's door opened to reveal a familiar figure. Thomas blinked in surprise. It was the hiker Sophia, though she looked dramatically different. Gone were the sweat-soaked hiking clothes, replaced by crisp white linen pants and a flowing blue top. Her hair was styled, her complexion radiant. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine, not on his dusty farm. "Thomas!" she called, smiling as she approached the porch. "I hoped you'd be home." "Ms. Chen," he replied, too surprised to say more. "Sophia, please," she corrected, climbing the porch steps with easy grace. "I know this is unexpected, I would have called ahead, but…" She gestured around, reminding him of his lack of phone service. "What brings you back this way?" Thomas asked, suddenly conscious of his worn overalls and the 3-day stubble on his face. "You, actually. Or rather, your farm." Her eyes were bright with excitement. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about this place since I left. The potential here is extraordinary." Thomas wasn't sure what to make of that. Potential for what, exactly? "May I come in? I have something I'd like to discuss with you." Thomas hesitated only briefly before nodding and holding the door. His mother had raised him with proper manners, even if he'd grown rusty from disuse. Sophia entered, taking in the simple farmhouse kitchen with its vintage appliances and handmade oak table. Rather than looking disappointed by the modest surroundings, she seemed delighted. "This is perfect," she murmured. "Absolutely perfect." Thomas gestured to the table, hastily gathering up his bills and shoving them into a drawer. "Can I get you something? Lemonade? Coffee?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." As Thomas busied himself with the percolator, Sophia pulled something from her designer handbag, a sleek tablet. She placed it on the table and waited patiently. When Thomas returned with 2 mugs of coffee, she launched in without preamble. "Thomas, what would you say if I told you I want to help save your farm?" He stared at her, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "I'd say you don't know what you're getting into. This place is drowning in debt." "I suspected as much," she said, not deterred in the slightest. "But I'm not talking about charity. I'm talking about a business proposition." Thomas set his mug down carefully. "What kind of proposition?" "I want to turn part of your farm into a wellness retreat," Sophia said, her eyes fixed on his face to gauge his reaction. "A place where people can come to disconnect, reconnect with nature, learn about sustainable farming, and heal from the stresses of modern life." Thomas let out a short laugh of disbelief. "People would pay for that?" "They would pay very well for it," Sophia assured him. "Especially if it's done right." She turned her tablet toward him, revealing a professional presentation with the title, Everett Farm Restoration Project. Thomas blinked at the sleek graphics and professional layout. "You've been busy," he remarked. "When I get inspired, I move quickly," Sophia replied. "May I show you what I'm envisioning?" Still skeptical but intrigued, Thomas nodded. Sophia swiped through slides showing beautiful images of farm to table dinners in rustic settings, yoga classes held in retrofitted barns, people harvesting vegetables alongside farmers, comfortable DAS, accommodations created from renovated outbuildings. "The concept is simple," she explained. "We preserve the authentic character and working nature of your farm while creating spaces for guests to stay and experiences for them to enjoy. You continue farming that's central to the whole concept, but we add revenue streams that are much more profitable than traditional agriculture alone." End quote. Thomas looked at the images that seemed impossibly far from his current reality. This would cost a fortune to set up. "It would require investment," Sophia acknowledged. "But I have investors ready to back this concept. People who believe in what I'm doing." "And what exactly is it that you do?" Thomas asked, realizing he still knew very little about this woman who had appeared with grand plans to transform his life. Sophia set down the tablet and met his eyes directly. "I'm a wellness entrepreneur. I founded Mindful Living Collective, wrote the Conscious Table cookbook series, and host the Rooted podcast. I have a following of people who trust my recommendations and would be eager to experience something like this." Thomas stared at her blankly. "You've never heard of any of that, have you?" she asked with a small, refreshing smile. "Can't say that I have," Thomas admitted. "Don't get out much these days." "That's actually what I love about this," Sophia said. "You didn't know who I was that day. You just offered kindness to a stranger because it was the right thing to do. That authenticity is what people are starving for." Thomas felt uncomfortable under her admiring gaze. "So you're some kind of celebrity then?" "In certain circles," she said modestly. "I've built a platform around helping people live more mindfully, more connected to their food sources and natural rhythms. But the irony is, I'd lost touch with those principles myself. I was burned out, Thomas. That hike was part of a desperate attempt to remember why I started this work in the first place." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Your farm this place reminded me." sitting on that porch swing, drinking lemonade made from real lemons and local honey. It was more healing than a month at the most expensive spa in California. Thomas wasn't sure what to say to that. The idea that his simple offering had meant something profound to this woman was difficult to process. "I'm not a businessman," he said finally. "Never have been. That's part of why I'm in this mess." "You wouldn't have to be," Sophia assured him. "That's what I bring to the table. My team would handle marketing, bookings, guest experiences, all of it. Your job would be to keep farming, to share your knowledge, to be the authentic heart of this place." "And what do you get out of it?" Thomas asked, still suspicious that there must be a catch. "A significant investment opportunity," Sophia said frankly. "These kinds of experiences are in high demand, but they're hard to create authentically. You can't fake a century-old farm with real history. I also get a place to center my own work going forward, hosting retreats, writing my next book, filming content that aligns with my values." She paused, then added more softly, "And, personally, a chance to be part of saving something worth saving." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. It seemed too good to be true, yet Sophia's presentation looked legitimate, and she clearly had resources behind her. "The bank's foreclosing in 9 days," he said bluntly. "Unless you're planning to move very fast, this conversation is academic." Sophia didn't seem surprised by this news. "How much do you need to stop the foreclosure?" Thomas named a figure that made him wince, just saying it out loud. Sophia nodded calmly. "That's manageable. Consider it the first investment in our partnership. We'd structure it as an advance against future profits." Thomas's head was spinning. "You'd put up that kind of money? Just like that?" "I've done my research on you, Thomas," Sophia admitted. "County records, the local agricultural extension office. You've never missed a payment until the last year. You've won awards for your produce quality. Your farm has no environmental violations. You're exactly the kind of partner I'm looking for, someone with integrity who's fallen on hard times, not through any fault of their own." It was strange to hear his life summarized by this outsider, to realize she'd investigated him while he knew so little about her. Yet he couldn't deny the facts she presented, nor the lifeline she was offering. "I'd need to think about it," he said cautiously. "See something in writing?" "Of course," Sophia replied, pulling a folder from her bag. "I took the liberty of having my lawyers draw up a preliminary agreement. Take your time reviewing it. Have your own lawyer look it over." Thomas nearly laughed at that. He hadn't been able to afford a lawyer since Margaret got sick. "The key points," Sophia continued, "are that you retain ownership of the land and final say on any changes to the farming operation. We form a joint business entity for the retreat portion, with profits split accordingly. Initial investment covers your immediate financial needs, plus renovation costs. And there's an exit clause if either of us decides the partnership isn't working after 1 year." She slid the folder across the table to him. "No pressure, Thomas. But if you're interested, we could move quickly enough to stop the foreclosure." Thomas stared at the folder, feeling like he was in some strange dream. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a desperate farmer staring down the end of his family legacy. Now a wellness celebrity he'd never heard of was offering salvation with strings attached. Couldn't yet fully see. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Why my farm? There must be hundreds of struggling farms you could choose from." Sophia's expression softened. "Because when I was at my lowest point, questioning everything about my life's work, you offered me shade, homemade lemonade, and simple human connection without wanting anything in return. That moment of kindness changed something for me." She gestured around the kitchen. "And this place has a soul, Thomas. Not every farm does. Your great-grandfather built something special here, and you've preserved that essence despite everything. People will feel that, just like I did." Thomas wasn't sure he believed in concepts like a farm having a soul, but he couldn't deny the sincerity in Sophia's voice. And with foreclosure looming, what did he have to lose by considering her offer? "I'll read through this tonight," he said, tapping the folder. "But I need to know more about exactly what you're proposing to do here. What changes you want to make." "Of course," Sophia said, visibly pleased by his willingness to engage. "Could I get a tour of the property? It would help me explain my vision in context." Thomas nodded and rose from the table. Whatever else happened, At least this would be a story to tell how a famous wellness guru had shown up at his kitchen table with dreams of transforming his failing farm into some kind of hippie retreat. As they stepped outside into the sunshine, Thomas couldn't help but wonder if his practical, no-nonsense wife Margaret would be laughing at the absurdity of it all, or telling him to grab this lifeline with both hands. By the time Thomas and Sophia had walked the entire property, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Thomas had shown her everything: the fields currently under cultivation, the fallow sections waiting for rotation, the small orchard of heritage apple trees his grandfather had planted, the spring-fed pond, the old barn, and various outbuildings in varying states of repair. Throughout the tour, Sophia had asked thoughtful questions about the farm's operation, the soil quality, the water sources, the history of each structure. She'd taken photos with her phone and made notes on a small pad she carried. Most surprisingly to Thomas, she seemed to genuinely understand farming, not in the theoretical way of someone who'd read books, but with practical knowledge that suggested real experience. "My grandparents had a small farm in Taiwan," she explained when he commented on this. "I spent summers there as a child. It was nothing like this scale, but the principles are the same." Now they stood on a small rise that offered the best view of the entire property, with the farmhouse and main buildings clustered at the center, and fields radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, making even the struggling crops look noble. "So," Thomas said, "now that you've seen it all, tell me exactly what changes you're proposing." Sophia took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the landscape with evident excitement. "The farm remains a working farm that's non-negotiable. We'd actually expand your vegetable production, focusing on heirloom varieties and organic practices. That becomes both a food source for guests and an educational component." She pointed to the large barn. The upper level of the barn would be converted to a beautiful community space for yoga, meditation, workshops, farm-to-table dinners. The essential character would remain, but we'd add proper flooring, lighting, heating for cold months. "The small outbuildings?" Thomas asked. "Transformed into guest accommodations," Sophia replied. "Simple but comfortable. Nothing ostentatious that would detract from the farm aesthetic. The chicken coop would be rebuilt, and expanded guests love fresh eggs. The old tool shed near the orchard would make a perfect writing studio." She turned in a slow circle, taking in the property. "We'd add walking paths through the fallow fields, maybe a meditation garden near the pond. The porch, that magical porch, would remain exactly as it is." Thomas tried to picture these changes, to imagine strangers walking his land, sleeping in renovated outbuildings, gathering in his barn. "And the house?" he asked cautiously. "Remains your private space," Sophia assured him, "though we might use the kitchen for cooking demonstrations occasionally, with your permission. And we'd need to update the guest bathroom for day visitors." Thomas nodded slowly. The changes sounded less drastic than he'd feared. The farm would still be a farm, just with additional purposes layered onto it. "What about staff?" "I can't run a farm and entertain city folk at the same time." "We'd hire appropriate staff," Sophia said. "A property manager, housekeeping for turnovers, a part-time chef for retreat weekends, someone to handle bookings and guest communications. You'd be involved as much or as little as you want in the guest experience." "And these people you'd bring here, what exactly would they be doing?" Sophia smiled. "Disconnecting from technology. Learning where their food comes from. Experiencing the rhythms of farm life. Some would come for structured retreats, yoga, writing, digital detox. Others would simply book a stay to experience the peace this place offers." She looked at him directly. "People are hungry for authenticity, Thomas. They spend their lives surrounded by screens and concrete, eating food that comes from who knows where. The chance to stay on a real working farm, to hear the stories of your family's history here, to put their hands in the soil that's incredibly valuable." Thomas wasn't convinced that watching him battle weeds and fix fences would be anyone's idea of a vacation, but Sophia spoke with such confidence that he found himself considering the possibility. "And you think people will pay good money for this? Enough to make a difference to the farm's bottom line?" "Without question," Sophia replied. Wellness tourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And what we're offering is unique, not a manufactured experience, but something real, with history and soul. Thomas winced slightly at her repeated references to the farm's soul, but he couldn't deny that the place held generations of his family's hopes, dreams, and labor. How soon could this all happen? He asked, thinking of the foreclosure deadline looming ever closer. The financial part stopping the foreclosure could happen immediately, Sophia said. The physical transformations would be phased. We could have basic accommodations ready within 2 months, the barn conversion by the end of summer, full operation by harvest time. My team moves efficiently. Her team. It was still strange to think of this woman having an entire organization behind her, resources and connections that seemed from another world compared to his isolated existence. And if I say yes, what quote? Happens tomorrow? The next day? I transfer the funds to stop the foreclosure, Sophia said simply. My project manager arrives by the end of the week to begin detailed planning. We hire local contractors wherever possible for the renovations. And I'd want to start documenting the whole process, the transformation of the farm, your story, with your permission, of course. Thomas frowned. Documenting how? Photos, videos, articles. Content for my platforms that shows the journey from struggling farm to vibrant retreat center. It's powerful storytelling, and it helps market the place before we even open. Thomas wasn't sure how he felt about becoming part of someone's content, about having his struggles and potential redemption shared with strangers. He was a private man by nature. I'd have approval? Over what gets shared? He asked. Absolutely, Sophia assured him. Nothing would be published without your sign-off. Your comfort is essential to making this work. They began walking back toward the house as the light faded. Thomas's mind was working overtime, trying to process the whirlwind of information and possibilities Sophia had presented. One more thing, he said as they neared the porch. Where do you fit in all this? Would you be living here? Visiting occasionally? I'd like to be here regularly, Sophia admitted. Not full-time initially, but for extended periods. This place would become a creative home base for me, a place to write my next book, film content, host special retreats. She hesitated, then added, to be completely transparent, Thomas, part of why this works financially is my personal brand connection to it. People who follow my work would be drawn to experience a place I've endorsed so completely. Thomas wasn't sure how he felt about his ancestral home becoming associated with someone else's brand, but he supposed that was the nature of modern business, and if it meant saving the farm, perhaps it was a compromise worth making. I need time to think, he said finally as they reached the porch steps. This is a lot, too. Take in. Of course, Sophia replied. I'll be staying in town tonight at the Millfield Inn. I can come back tomorrow afternoon, or you can call me. She handed him a business card with elegant lettering. Sophia Chen, founder CEO, Mindful Living Collective, followed by her phone number. The agreement is just a starting point, she added. We can adjust any terms that don't feel right to you. Thomas nodded, tucking the card into his pocket alongside the thick folder she'd given him earlier. I appreciate that. As Sophia turned to leave, she paused. I believe in this vision, Thomas. I believe in what your farm could become. But more importantly, I believe it deserves to be saved for its own sake, for what it already is. With that, she walked to her SUV, waving once before driving away down the dusty road. Thomas remained on the porch long after her taillights had disappeared, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. He thought about his father and grandfather, about what they would make of this unexpected opportunity. They had been traditional men who believed farming was about hard balai, work, and self-reliance, not catering to city people seeking authentic experiences. But they had also been practical men who adapted when necessary to keep the farm alive. His grandfather had shifted crop strategies during the Depression. His father had embraced certain technologies that increased efficiency without sacrificing quality. And now it was his turn to decide whether adaptation meant opening the farm to this new purpose. This partnership with a woman from a world so different from his own. Thomas finally went inside and spread the agreement across his kitchen table, reading every word carefully by the light of the old overhead lamp. The Legal language was complex, but the essence seemed fair, probably more than fair to him, if he was being honest. After reading it twice, he pulled out his ancient laptop and, using the limited cellular data plan he could barely afford, searched for information about Sophia Chen. The results were overwhelming. Millions of followers across various platforms, best-selling books, a podcast with download numbers that made his head spin, articles in major publications describing her as the most influential voice in the mindful eating movement and wellness guru to the stars. There were photos of her with celebrities Thomas vaguely recognized, speaking on stages to thousands, demonstrating recipes in gleaming kitchens. It was strange to reconcile this public figure with the exhausted hiker who had gratefully accepted his lemonade, or even the businesswoman who had walked his fields asking knowledgeable questions about crop rotation. One article caught his attention, dated just 2 months ago, titled, "Wellness Pioneer Sophia Chen Announces Sabbatical Citing Burnout." It described her decision to step back from public appearances and daily content creation to reconnect with the core values that inspired her work. There was speculation about what this meant for her brand and the lucrative partnerships she had built. Thomas leaned back in his chair, pieces falling into place. Her unexpected hiking trip through the middle of nowhere. The comments about disconnecting, about needing to remember why she started her work. She had been at a crossroads of her own when she stumbled upon his farm. Perhaps that explained the intensity of her connection to this place. It had appeared at exactly the moment she needed it, offering a vision of a simpler, more authentic life that had once been at the core of her teachings. Thomas rubbed his tired eyes and looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of his family's home for generations. The worn countertops where his mother had taught him to shell peas. The wooden table where his father had calculated crop yields with pencil and paper. The window through which Margaret had watched birds at the feeder during her final months. Was he really considering transforming this deeply personal space into some kind of retreat for wealthy strangers? Yet the alternative was losing it entirely. The foreclosure notice sat on top of the pile of bills in the drawer, its deadline unyielding. In the quiet of the night, Thomas made a pot of coffee and continued reading about Sophia Chen, trying to understand the woman who was offering to save his legacy. The more he read, the more legitimate she appeared. Her rise from food blogger to wellness empire had been documented in business magazines. Her commitment to sustainable agriculture seemed genuine, with articles detailing her advocacy for small farmers. Most tellingly, there were no scandals, no exposés claiming she was a fraud. Even the announcement of her sabbatical had been met with sympathy from her followers, many sharing stories of how her work had changed their relationship with food and mindfulness. As dawn broke over the eastern fields, Thomas came to a decision. He would accept Sophia's offer with a few additional conditions of his own. He couldn't afford to turn down this lifeline, and something in his gut told him that despite their different worlds, Sophia Chen was someone he could trust. When Sophia returned the following afternoon, Thomas was waiting on the porch sling, the agreement folder on his lap. She ascended the steps with barely contained anticipation in her eyes. "Have you made a decision?" she asked, taking a seat beside him on the swing. "I have some conditions," Thomas said directly. "Things I'd like added to the agreement." Sophia nodded, looking relieved that he wasn't rejecting her proposal outright. "I'm listening. First, the farmhouse kitchen can be used for demonstrations, but my bedroom and Margaret's studio remain private, off-limits to guests and cameras." "Absolutely," Sophia agreed immediately. "Second, I want a clause that ensures the farm remains actual farmland, producing food, regardless of how successful the retreat becomes. This can't become just a playground where people pretend to farm." "That's central to my vision too," Sophia assured him. "Authentic farming is the heart of this concept." "Third," Thomas continued, "I want a cap on guest numbers. This place can't handle busloads of people trampling around. The peace would be lost." "We're thinking intimate experiences," Sophia said. "Maximum 12 guests at a time, carefully vetted, quality over quantity." Thomas was pleased that their visions aligned on these points. "Last thing, I want a separate account set up with funds specifically for preserving the historical aspects of the farm, the original house structure, the hand-dug, well, the family cemetery at the north corner. These aren't revenue generators, but they matter. Sophia's expression softened. That's important to me too, Thomas. The history here is irreplaceable. I'd be happy to establish a preservation fund as part of our agreement. Thomas nodded, relieved that she understood. Then I think we have a deal. Really? Sophia's face lit up with genuine joy. You won't regret this, Thomas. We're going to create something special here, something that honors the past while securing the future. One step at a time, Thomas cautioned, not quite ready to embrace her enthusiasm. First step is stopping that foreclosure. I'll have my financial team wire the funds today, Sophia promised. And I'd like to bring my project manager out tomorrow to begin planning, if that works for you. That works. Thomas agreed, still somewhat dazed by how quickly things were moving. Sophia hesitated, then asked, "Would you be comfortable if I took some preliminary photos today? Just of the exterior and landscape. I'd like to start documenting the before as we begin this journey." Thomas considered this. It felt strange to have his struggling farm preserved in images, its current state a testament to his financial failures. But there was something appealing about documenting the transformation, about having a record of what was to come. "All right," he agreed. "But not inside the house. Not yet." "Of course," Sophia said, pulling a professional-looking camera from her bag. "I'll just capture the essence of the place, the light, the structures, the landscape." As she moved around the property, framing shots with an artist's eye, Thomas watched from the porch. He still couldn't quite believe that this woman, a stranger 3 weeks ago, was now his business partner, the savior of his family's legacy. "This light is extraordinary," Sophia called from near the old oak tree. "It has a quality you don't find in California, softer, more golden." Thomas had never thought much about the quality of light on his farm. He'd been too busy fighting to keep it afloat. But watching Sophia move through the familiar landscape with fresh eyes made him see it differently, the way the late afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. How it illuminated the weathered red of the barn, making it glow like it had been painted yesterday instead of 15 years ago. "People will feel it immediately," Sophia said when she returned to the porch, scrolling through the images on her camera display. That sense of timelessness, of connection to something enduring. She showed him a few of the photos his farm captured in ways he'd never seen it. The angles emphasized its best features, the light softened its flaws. In Sophia's lens, even the struggling crops looked poetic, a testament to perseverance against the odds. "I should get back to town," Sophia said finally. "Make those calls to stop the foreclosure and prepare my team for tomorrow." Thomas nodded, extending his hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing something here worth saving." Sophia took his hand, her grip warm and firm. "Thank you for taking a chance on this vision. On me." As she drove away for the second time, Thomas sat back down on the porch swing, trying to process the seismic shift in his circumstances. 24 hours ago, he had been a man counting down the days until he lost everything. Now he was a partner in something called Everett Farm Restoration Project, with a wellness celebrity planning to transform his property into a destination for people seeking authenticity and peace. Margaret would have found the whole thing hilarious and then rolled up her sleeves to help make it work. She had always been the adaptable one, embracing change while he resisted it. "Well, Maggie," he murmured to the evening air, "I'm adapting now. Better late than never." The swing creaked comfortingly as the shadows lengthened across the porch. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself to feel something like hope. The next month passed in a whirlwind of activity unlike anything Thomas had experienced on the farm before. True to her word, Sophia had the foreclosure payment processed within 24 hours, buying them time and security to proceed with their plans. Her project manager, an efficient woman named Maya, with a background in sustainable architecture, arrived the next day with a team of assessors who examined every building, evaluated the electrical and plumbing systems, tested the soil and water, and created detailed drawings of the entire property. Thomas had been prepared to feel invaded by these city professionals traipsing around his land, but to his surprise, they approached their work with respect and genuine enthusiasm for the farm's potential. Maya in particular seemed to grasp his attachment to the place, always consulting him before suggesting changes and listening carefully to his knowledge of the land's quirks and history. "We want to honor what's here," she explained as they walked the property together. "Not impose some artificial concept of what a farm retreat should be." Contractors were hired from the local community wherever possible, a decision that won Thomas's approval and began to generate buzz in town about the changes coming to Everett Farm. The bank manager who had been preparing to foreclose on him now greeted Thomas warmly on his infrequent trips to town, asking about the project as if they had been supporters all along. Sophia herself came and went, dividing her time between the farm and her obligations in California. Each time she returned, she brought new energy and ideas, but always deferred to Thomas on matters concerning the agricultural aspects of the operation. True to the agreement, the farmhouse remained primarily Thomas's domain, though the kitchen was updated with new appliances that maintained its vintage aesthetic while functioning more efficiently. The guest bathroom was completely renovated, and the porch was carefully restored, replacing rotted boards and applying fresh paint while preserving its weathered charm. The most dramatic transformation happened in the barn. The lower level remained functional storage for farm equipment, but the upper level was converted into a soaring, light-filled space with exposed beams, polished wood floors, and large windows that framed views of the sea and surrounding fields. It was beautiful in a way that respected the structure's agricultural heritage, while creating a gathering place unlike anything in the surrounding county. The three outlying buildings that had once stored tools and feed were gutted and reimagined as cozy guest cabins. Each with its own character, but all featuring sustainable materials, efficient design, and views oriented toward the property's most beautiful vistas. Throughout it all, Thomas continued farming now with resources he hadn't had before. A new irrigation system helped combat the ongoing drought. Heritage seeds were sourced for vegetables that would feature prominently in the retreat's farm table offerings. The chicken coop was rebuilt and populated with rare heritage breeds that produced eggs in a rainbow of natural colors. At Sophia's suggestion, they added beehives near the apple orchard, installed a small greenhouse for extending the growing season, and created a beautiful herb garden just steps from the kitchen door. These additions weren't just aesthetically pleasing, but practical improvements to the farm's functionality and sustainability. Sophia documented everything: the renovation process, the agricultural improvements, and Thomas's gradually evolving perspective. True to her word, she always showed him the content before sharing it, and to his surprise, he found himself becoming more comfortable with the storytelling aspect of the project. "Your knowledge is valuable," Sophia told him one evening, as they reviewed footage of him explaining the importance of crop rotation to soil health. "People connect with your authenticity. You're not performing farming, you're sharing generations of wisdom." The project wasn't without challenges. Delays in materials, unexpected structural issues in the old buildings, and one powerful summer storm that damaged the newly installed solar array all tested their resolve. There were moments when Thomas questioned whether they could truly transform his struggling farm into the haven Sophia envisioned. But with each completed cabin, each successful harvest from the improved fields, each new element that combined the farm's heritage with thoughtful innovation, Thomas's doubts receded. Something remarkable was emerging from the collaboration of his practical farming knowledge and Sophia's vision for healing connection to the land. 4 months after their partnership began, as summer gave way to early autumn, Sophia arrived at the farm with news. "We've been invited to be featured in Sustainable Living magazine," she told Thomas, as they walked the newly created path that wound through the wildflower meadow they'd established in a formerly fallow field. "It's one of the most respected publications in the wellness and environmental space. The publicity would be incredible for our launch." Thomas still wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of publicity, but he had seen enough of Sophia's world now to understand its importance to their business model. "What would that involve?" he asked cautiously. A photographer and writer would spend 2 days here, Sophia explained, capturing the essence of what we're creating. They'd want to interview both of us about the vision, the partnership, the restoration process. Thomas frowned slightly. Both of us? Your perspective is crucial, Sophia insisted. This isn't just my project, it's our creation together. Your generations of connection to this land, your dedication to sustainable farming before it was fashionable, that's what makes this story compelling. Thomas had never thought of himself as part of a compelling story. He was just a farmer, trying to preserve his family's legacy. But seeing the passion in Sophia's eyes, he found it hard to refuse. I'm not good with words like you are, he warned. Don't expect me to sound like one of your podcasts. Sophia laughed, a sound that had become more common around the farm as their partnership developed. That's exactly why your voice matters. You're real, Thomas. You speak from experience, not theory. Thomas reluctantly agreed to the magazine feature, and 2 weeks later found himself awkwardly answering questions from a journalist as a photographer captured images of the transformed farm bathed in perfect autumn light. To his surprise, the process was less painful than he'd anticipated. The journalist seemed genuinely interested in the farm's history and Thomas's agricultural philosophy. The questions were thoughtful, focusing on the land's regeneration and the preservation of rural traditions, rather than trying to make him explain wellness concepts he still only vaguely understood. Watching Sophia in her element articulate, passionate, effortlessly translating between his world and the world of her followers, Thomas realized how fortunate he had been that day she appeared on his road. Not just because of the financial salvation she had brought, but because of the new purpose she had helped him discover in the land he had always loved. The evening after the journalist departed, Thomas and Sophia sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. The farm was quiet, the construction crews gone for the day, the fields settled into evening stillness. We're ready, Sophia said, breaking the companionable silence. The website launches tomorrow, and we'll begin accepting our first reservations for next month's soft opening. Thomas felt a flutter of anxiety. What if no one comes? Sophia smiled, her confidence unwavering. They'll come. In fact, we already have a waiting list for my announcement that I was creating a rural retreat. People have been speculating for months about where it would be. And now they'll know it's here, Thomas said, still trying to wrap his mind around the idea that people would eagerly pay to visit his once failing farm. Are you ready for that? Sophia asked, studying his face in the fading light. For strangers to become part of this place's story? Thomas considered the question, looking out at the transformed landscape. The buildings glowed warmly in the sunset, restored to their former glory, and given new purpose. The fields were healthier than they had been in years, nourished by improved practices and investments in soil health. The new elements, the meditation garden near the pond, the expanded herb garden, the restored apple orchard, all felt like natural extensions of what had always been special about this land. I think I am, he said finally. This place was meant to sustain people. For generations that meant producing food. Now maybe it means feeding something else too, that hunger for connection you talk about. Sophia's eyes shone with emotion. That's beautiful, Thomas. He shrugged, embarrassed by his unexpected eloquence. Just calling it like I see it. That's why this works, Sophia said softly. Your honesty, your groundedness, you keep this real while I handle the rest. The swing creaked gently as they fell silent again, each contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter born of kindness, to a partnership that had saved his farm and given her work new meaning. Tomorrow would bring new chapters, guests, programming, the day-to-day reality of running a wellness retreat on a working farm. There would be challenges they couldn't yet anticipate, adjustments to make as they found their rhythm. But sitting there, in the gathering darkness, Thomas felt a peace he hadn't known since before Margaret's illness. The land that had been his burden now felt like his greatest asset again. The solitude that had been his prison was now a gift he could share with others. All because a tired hiker had stopped by his fence on the hottest day of summer, and he had offered what little he had: shade, lemonade, and simple human connection. 6 months later, Thomas stood at the edge of the newly expanded vegetable garden, watching a group of retreat guests learning to plant seedlings under the guidance of the farm educator they'd hired from the local Bress Agricultural College. The early spring sun warmed his shoulders as he observed these city dwellers, executives, doctors, tech entrepreneurs, kneeling in the soil with expressions of wonder as they created new life with their hands. Everett Farm Retreat had exceeded even Sophia's optimistic projections. The waiting list for stays now stretched months into the future. The feature in sustainable living had spawned coverage in other publications, and Sophia's documentation of the farm's transformation had captivated her substantial following. More surprisingly to Thomas, the farm's produce had found eager markets through the connections Sophia had established with high-end restaurants in the city. Chefs now competed for his heritage tomatoes and rare apple varieties, paying premium prices for crops grown with methods his grandfather would have recognized. The farm was not only sustaining itself, but thriving financially stable for the first time in years, while remaining true to its agricultural roots. Thomas still spent his days farming, now with help from a small, passionate team that shared his commitment to the land. His hands were still in the soil daily, but the crushing weight of impending failure had lifted from his shoulders. Sophia approached from the direction of the barn, where she had been filming content for her newly relaunched podcast. She had officially ended her sabbatical 2 months earlier, returning to public life with renewed purpose and a message grounded in the authentic connection to food and land she had rediscovered at Everett Farm. She now spent at least 2 weeks of each month on the property, hosting special retreats, creating content, and continuing to refine their vision together. The guest cabin furthest from the main house had become her private residence during these stays, a sanctuary where she could write, think, and reconnect with the simplicity that had originally drawn her to this place. "How are our novice farmers doing?" she asked, joining Thomas at the garden's edge. "Better than I expected," he admitted. "That woman in the blue shirt, the investment banker from Chicago, she's got a natural touch with those pepper plants." Sophia smiled. "Sometimes people surprise themselves when they discover capabilities they never knew they had. That's the magic of this place." Thomas nodded, still occasionally bemused by Sophia's way of speaking, but no longer finding it as foreign as he once had. Over months of partnership, they had developed a shared language that bridged their different worlds. "The chef from that farm-to-table restaurant is arriving tomorrow," Thomas said. "Wants to plan his summer menu around our heirloom varieties." "Perfect," Sophia replied. "We should have him do a demonstration dinner for that weekend's guests. They'd love the connection between what they're helping plant and extraordinary cuisine." This kind of collaborative planning had become routine between them, Thomas handling the agricultural realities, while Sophia created experiences that maximized their value and impact. Their partnership had evolved into something neither could have fully envisioned that first day on the porch swing. "I got a call from the Historical Society," Thomas mentioned as they walked toward the farmhouse. "They want to include the farm on their annual tour. Center restoration work preserves important agricultural heritage." "That's wonderful recognition," Sophia said. "Your Greek-grandfather would be proud." "He wouldn't know what to make of the meditation garden," Thomas said with a small smile. "Or the sound baths in the barn, but he'd recognize the respect for the land," Sophia countered. "The commitment to growing food that nourishes people. The core of what makes this place special hasn't changed, it's just reaching people in new ways." Thomas couldn't argue with that. For all the additions and innovations they'd brought to Everett Farm, its heart remained what it had always been, a place where human beings connected to the earth and to each other. As they reached the porch, Thomas paused to observe the guests dispersing from their gardening session, some heading toward the cabins to rest, others wandering to the pond or orchard to explore. Their faces reflected the particular kind of contentment that came from physical work in the open air, a satisfaction Thomas had known all his life, but had never considered valuable to others. "Still hard to believe sometimes," he mused, "that people pay good money to experience what I took for granted." "That's often how it works," Sophia said thoughtfully. "We don't see the value in what's familiar until someone else points it out. I built an entire career teaching people to appreciate simple food, mindfully prepared, only to lose that appreciation myself until I stumbled upon your porch." Thomas remembered the exhausted hiker who had appeared that day, so different from the confident, centered woman who stood beside him now. Their journeys had mirrored each other in unexpected ways, both finding renewal through this partnership, this place. "Got a letter from the bank yesterday," Thomas said, changing the subject. "Offering a new line of credit if we want to expand further. Quite a change from the foreclosure notice." Sophia laughed. Amazing how success changes their perspective. "Do you want to expand?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "Maybe. Not right away. But I've been thinking about the north parcel could be good for more cabins eventually. Or maybe a small vineyard. The soil and aspect would be right for certain grape varieties." Look at you, Sophia teased. "Thinking like an entrepreneur." "Blame your influence," Thomas replied. Some of it was bound to rub off eventually. They had reached the porch steps, and Thomas gestured to the swing. Still the same simple wooden seat that had started their journey, though the chains had been replaced and the wood refinished. "Have a few minutes?" he asked. "Lemonade's fresh in the fridge." "Always," Sophia said, following him onto the porch. As Thomas went inside to fetch the drinks, he caught his reflection in the kitchen window. A man transformed not just by circumstances, but by perspective. His face had more color, fewer worry lines. His posture had straightened as the burden of impending failure had lifted. He returned with 2 glasses of lemonade, still made with real lemons and local honey, still served in the same glass tumblers he'd used that first day. Some traditions were worth preserving, even as everything else evolved. "A guest asked me something interesting today," Sophia said as they settled onto the swing. "She wanted to know if I planned all this finding your farm, creating this retreat, if it was a calculated business decision." "What did you tell her?" Thomas asked, curious. Sophia smiled, looking out at the land that had become her creative home and his salvation. "I told her that the best things in life can't be planned. They happen when we're open to possibilities we never imagined." Thomas nodded, thinking of the countless decisions and chances that had led to this unlikely partnership, his choice to offer lemonade to a stranger, her decision to hike that particular route on that specific day, both of them reaching crossroads in their lives simultaneously. "To possibilities," he said, raising his glass. "And to kindness," Sophia added, clinking her glass against his. The simple act that started it all. The porch swing creaked gently as they sipped their lemonade in comfortable silence, watching the sun cast long shadows across the thriving farm that had so nearly been lost. In the distance, retreat guests wandered the property, finding their own connections to this place that had been given new life through an unexpected partnership between a struggling farmer and a wellness icon who had each found in the other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it most. Thomas thought of all the generations of Everetts who had worked this land before him, adapting to changing times while preserving what mattered most. He had nearly been the one to lose it all, but instead had found a way to secure its future by embracing change rather than resisting it. As if reading his thoughts, Sophia said quietly, "This farm has always been about nurturing life, Thomas. Now it's just nurturing it in more ways than one." He nodded, watching a retreat guest pause to take a photo of the sunset illuminating the red barn. "Margaret would have loved this," he said softly. "She always said this place had healing in it. Guess she was right all along." "The wisest ones usually are," Sophia replied. The swing creaked its agreement as day faded into evening on Everett Farm. No longer failing, no longer isolated, but transformed into a place where past and future, simplicity and innovation, farming and wellness had found harmonious balance. All because a tired hiker had paused at a fence and a struggling farmer had offered the simple hospitality of his porch swing on the hottest day of summer. Thomas looked out at his transformed farm, at the life and purpose now flowing through a place that had nearly been lost. Sometimes, salvation came in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes the thing you thought was ending was actually just beginning a new chapter. And sometimes the greatest gift you could offer was simply a place to rest, a cold drink, and the willingness to see value in what you'd always taken for granted. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Another day was ending at Everett Farm, but unlike the uncertain sunsets of a year ago, This one promised a tomorrow full of possibility. To seeing the extraordinary in ordinary places, Sophia said, raising her glass one more time. And to porch slings, Thomas added with a smile. Never underestimate the power of a good porch sling. The simple wooden seat creaked beneath them, bearing witness to the unlikely friendship and partnership that had saved a farm, renewed a purpose, and created something neither could have imagined on their own. A place where the past was honored, the present embraced, and the future secured. All through the simple recognition that sometimes what looks like the end of the road is actually just the beginning of a new journey.